Hello and welcome to Ukrainian Flames, a special project by Ukraine Crisis Media Center, NGO Euroatlantic Course, and Analytical Center of Ukrainian Catholic University. My name is Viktor. I'm head of the UCMC Press Center. Please like, share this video, and subscribe our channel to stay tuned. NATO membership has been declared a strategic goal of Ukraine enshrined in the constitution. Joining the alliance was difficult before Russia's full-scale invasion, and since February 24, all of Ukraine's efforts in this direction have been literally blocked. At the same time, for 2 months, Ukraine has been demonstrating such a defense capability that any European country can envy it. Independent experts underline that taking into account the threat of Russian aggression to all Europe, it is obvious that NATO actually needs Ukraine. This is what experts will talk about today, and we start with Eugene Czolij.
Ladies and gentlemen, why does NATO need Ukraine? This may have seemed like an odd question before February 24, 2022. Today, however, the answer is very clear. An independent and territorially integral Ukraine is the best guarantee of peace and stability for NATO member countries. That is why NATO and its member countries need Ukraine. The world is currently facing the greatest geopolitical crisis since World War II due to Russia's genocidal war against Ukraine. As a result, NATO now needs to learn certain lessons to avoid an even worse catastrophe for its member countries. First, the war launched by Russia against Ukraine on February 24, 2022 could have been avoided if NATO and its member countries had taken control of the geopolitical agenda instead of allowing an authoritarian despot with insatiable imperialist ambitions to define it. Indeed, had NATO and its member countries imposed severe sanctions and provided Ukraine with the necessary defensive lethal weapons in December 2021 to pressure Russia to de-escalate its military buildup on the borders of Ukraine, instead of doing so only after Russia initiated its full-scale war, Putin could have backed out of his full invasion plan without losing face, at least in his eyes, by providing a lame explanation such as that the buildup was just another military exercise without any intent to further invade Ukraine. Second, Ukraine has now fully dispelled the myth perpetuated by Russia that it is a military superpower that could easily overcome Ukraine and, with Ukraine subjugated, become once again the threatening empire that it was during the Cold War. Indeed, contrary to what Russia and even some NATO experts believed at the outset, it is now very clear that Russia is not able to overcome Ukraine, let alone do so in a couple of days, as was initially planned. Unfortunately, this has led to the perpetration of an incredible number of war crimes by Russia's indiscriminate shelling of civilians and civil infrastructure in Ukraine, resulting in the killing of Ukraine's civilian population, including innocent children, and massive destruction of Ukraine's cities and towns. Much of this destruction could have been avoided had NATO and its member countries provided Ukraine the necessary anti-aircraft and anti-missile defense systems for Ukraine to impose a no-fly zone over its airspace. Third, NATO is only now realizing the full impact of its measured and reserved support of Ukraine to date, which has resulted in a genocidal war, a shock to global energy markets, a threatened global food crisis, and a refugee crisis that impacts numerous countries. Moreover, Europe's security has been dramatically compromised. Indeed, on March 4, 2022, the Russian military shelled Europe's largest nuclear power plant situated in Zaporizhzhia, that, according to Ukraine's authorities, could have resulted in an environmental disaster 10 times worse than the 1986 explosion at the Chernobyl nuclear plant. Fourth, Putin considers the US and NATO as Russia's main enemies, capable of a preemptive strike by using Ukraine as a foothold for such a strike. Indeed, on February 22, 2022, 2 days before Russia launched its full-fledged war against Ukraine, Putin delivered the following hostile message to the West, and I quote, "I will explain that the US strategic planning documents stipulate an option of the so-called preemptive strike on enemy's missile systems. And we know who the main enemy for the US and NATO is. It is Russia. NATO documents officially, straightforwardly declare Russia as the main threat for Euroatlantic security, and Ukraine will serve as a foothold for such a strike." End of quote. This message indicates unmistakably that Russia's strategic course is to defeat NATO and reconstitute a neo-Soviet empire. This course clearly does not stop with Ukraine. It continues westward into NATO member countries.
Yurii Oliinyk, expert and researcher, underlines that Ukraine is the only one country in Europe which has modern experience of fighting with Russia. This is why it can be very valuable in NATO.
Why not to need Ukraine? I think there are four great reasons. Firstly, you know that before the war, many experts in the world said that Russia has the set level of the most powerful military in the world after USA and China. But nowadays we could see that this army is old, is non so efficient that they said, but it not only the less efficiency of Russia army, but also the power of Ukrainian nations and Ukrainian army. Only Ukrainians have experience in war against Russia in the common sense in all sphere, because in Afghanistan, in Vietnam, in Syria, where USA, Western countries fight in proxy wars, in helping partisans, and not in the common and great war with Russia. Only Ukraine have this experience, and this experience of modern war in so great territory and great usage of resources, of military resources, economical resources, and militarization all the nation, which fight for independence. Secondly, the most powerful armies of NATO nowadays have two countries, United States of America and Turkey. After this, the most powerful army in Europe have only Ukraine, during not only the efficiency, but after the number of soldiers, after the using resources, and after the experience of battles. Secondly, without Ukraine, NATO couldn't have enough possibility to defend the allies in Baltic region, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, in Poland, in Romania. This country sees the problems of Russia aggression. They give money, give resources to rebuild armies, but this process need a time, need a years. But Russia have the platform in really occupied Belarus, and provocations in the borders of Lithuania and Poland is real danger. Firstly, after decline of Putin regime, many nations, colonized nations in Siberia, Caucasus, and Volga regions, some regions of mainly Russian people would want to have a self-determination. There were a great risk of Hausization of this territory and the problems of nuclear weapon, the aim of denuclearization of post-Russia sphere will rise. Only Ukraine could help NATO to resolve this problem, and without Ukraine, nobody could stand for the peace in a post-Russia sphere in Eastern Europe. Thank you.
Yurii Syrotiuk says that NATO needs Ukraine's membership because of Ukrainian soldiers, Ukrainian territories, and Ukrainian ideas. Let's take a look.
Юрій Syrotiuk, директор Недержавного аналітичного центру Української студії стратегічних досліджень. Чому НАТО потребує України? На мою думку, з трьох основних моментів. Перший – фактор території. Приєднання до Північно-Атлантичного альянсу території в 600 тисяч квадратних кілометрів, яка фактично закриває весь європейський простір, збільшує територію альянсу, робить його безпечнішим, закриває східний фланг НАТО, Балтійські країни, які є під постійною російською загрозою, і відсуває фронт найбільшої загрози зараз для євроатлантичної спільноти російського імперіалізму, відсуває від східного кордону Польщі до східного кордону України. Тому з точки зору території, Україна, яка знаходиться в серці Євразії, є дуже важливою територією для Європи і для НАТО. Друге, чим важлива Україна для НАТО? Людьми. Україна – це величезна країна з великим населенням, яке здатне, яке має досвід участі в бойових діях, в конвенційній великій війні, і яке готове не просто просити допомогу в НАТО, а бути самою захисником. Бо Україна не так потребує людей, солдатів натівських, як потребує натівського озброєння. Натомість Україна готова давати своїх людей, мотивованих, навчених, які зможуть захищати НАТО. І третє, чому НАТО потребує України, НАТО потребує оновлення своєї ідеї. Україна може повернути в Європу і в НАТО дух тої старої Європи, дух лицарства, дух честі. А найголовніше, Україна в НАТО – це остаточна смерть російського імперіалізму. Україна як член НАТО ставить крапку на будь-яких реваншистських ідеях Росії відновити Совєтський Союз, а отже відновити агресію Східної Європи і тиск на Європу. Тому в цьому плані незалежна Україна, вільна Україна, Україна, яка захищає європейську свободу, теж дуже важлива для НАТО, як країна, яка здатна повертати сенси. Ну і зрештою, Україна є найсучаснішим полігоном. Україна потрібна для НАТО, щоб ту всю зброю, яку виготовляє НАТО, опробувати в великій війні. Тому що ми єдина країна в світі, яка сьогодні здатна боротися і вести війну проти будь-якої країни. Ми показуємо, як можна працювати з сучасним озброєнням. Ми те озброєння, яке виготовляють країни НАТО, яке можуть випробувати виключно на полігонах, ми випробовуємо в прямих військових діях проти країни, яка до початку російсько-української агресії була другою воєнною потугою в світі. Після війни з Україною ми бачимо, що Росія звичайна відстала країна, і багато натівських країн можуть зрозуміти, як боротися з такими країнами. Тому, очевидно, не тільки Україна потребує членства в НАТО, але і НАТО потребує членства України. Українськими людьми-солдатами, українськими територіями і, головне, українськими ідеями.
And here is one more comment from Viktor Tregubov, captain of Ukrainian armed forces.
NATO was created to stop the expansionism of Moscow, to secure peace, liberal values, Western values, to secure Europe from Russian, Soviet, for the time, aggression. And it was its actually main reason to exist. NATO exists today, and here we are. Here we see Moscow aggression against Ukraine. And here we see Ukraine that actually is effective in stopping that aggressor. Ukraine that is effective in being shield of Europe, shield of the European countries. So Ukraine is naturally doing what NATO was created for. And Ukraine also demonstrates that it's loyal to Western values, loyal to Western course, loyal to protection of Europe, that Ukraine is actually ready to fight for the Europe, for the democracy, for all the things NATO was created to protect. So it's only natural things that if Ukraine want to fight and to die to stop Russians and to defend the values NATO was created to protect, that Ukraine should be a part of NATO. We cannot just leave Ukraine be part of some kind of Russian sphere of influence. First of all, because people of Ukraine never wanted that. And now it's impossible. It's impossible for us. We won't stay close to Russia, politically, economically, mentally, culturally. So, well, you cannot just leave Ukraine be the barrier. If Ukraine wants to fight, and Ukraine wants to fight against expansionism, imperialism, and the brutality of Russian regime, Ukraine should be a part of NATO, and NATO needs it as well as Ukraine. Thank you.
You've been watching Ukrainian Flames, a special project by Ukraine Crisis Media Center, NGO, Euroatlantic Course, and Analytical Center of Ukrainian Catholic University. In the description to this video, you can find the information about how personally you can help Ukraine against Russian aggression. Everything is gonna be Ukraine.